Have you noticed something too?
It's like truth is just breaking down and is becoming increasingly
Impossible to trust anything we see online.
AI voices, beauty filters, lies, misinformation, bots. If you don't do something before it's too late,
It's not just going to undermine our trust in each other. It could shake the very foundations of reality.
We're living
In the age of bullshit.
We are surrounded by bullshit.
Bullshit is everywhere.
People are literally lying to our face.
You know Bruce Lee's not really dead, don't you?
Never taken steroids. I've never done PED.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
That's a lot of bullshit.
There were tears that ran down my face, but I did not cry.
President Obama is the founder of ISIS.
Instances of bullshit like this are on the rise.
And this bullshit has some broader implications.
I now no longer trust anybody.
We just are not going to be able to figure out what's real.
one of the most salient features of our culture is that there is so much bullshit. Everyone knows this, and each of us contributes his share, writes philosopher Harry Frankfurt in his 1986 essay. But most people are rather confident in their ability to recognize bullshit, so the phenomenon has not aroused much deliberate concern. In this video, you'll learn how bullshit wreaks havoc in society, why you might actually be worse at spotting it than you think, and at the end, I'll reveal the secrets to never being bullshitted again. This is Walden, one of America's most beloved books about author Henry David Thoreau's 2 years spent living alone in nature. I went to the woods, he wrote, to live Spartan and drive life into its lowest terms. However, his story is peppered with exaggerations. His cabin was actually in a busy park where he hosted parties and fled to his mum and sister's house down the road whenever he wanted hot food or clean clothes. Thoreau mentions some of this in passing, so he's not a liar, but he skimps on details that would have made a story sound less epic. So what exactly is the difference between lies and bullshit?
Bullshit is a disregard for the truth. It's when you talk without really knowing what you're talking about, or without really caring whether what you're saying is true or not. Bullshit is different from lying because a liar really knows they're lying. But a bullshitter doesn't necessarily know what's true or care what's true.
From exaggerated claims about a product, misleading statistics used to support an argument, or empty platitudes used to avoid engaging with difficult issues.
We're not handicapped, we're handy-capable.
It doesn't take a genius to see that bullshit is pretty much everywhere.
The entire country is completely full of shit.
But why does it even matter if society is full of bullshit?
Respect for the truth and a concern for the truth, these are among the foundations of civilization.
But none of this matters unless we can actually agree on what truth is. And this is where I made a big mistake. Up until recently, I believed in Aristotle's categorical definition of truth, which is a statement is true only if it corresponds to reality. Therefore, this statement is true and this one is false. But how about now? Or now? This is where a competing idea called pragmatism comes in. Philosopher William James argued that truth is not always a black and white account of reality. Sometimes it's more of a gradient where a statement becomes true if it's agreed on by enough people and achieves a particular goal. But problems arise when we start to confuse these two definitions. Nowhere is this issue more pronounced than on the modern internet. With no overarching code of conduct, the intense global competition for views and growth has become the only common value shared by all creators.
The increase in the amount of bullshit is because of the intensity of the marketing motive in contemporary society.
Even those who sincerely intend to be categorically honest feel pressured to be more and more pragmatic, or to put it bluntly, to exaggerate.
If you want to go viral, don't say tip, say secret. Don't say good, say the best. Don't say hard, say impossible.
But I don't think this matters, because while it's very easy to blame society for our problems, I discovered something even more shocking. Human beings don't care about the truth at all. Do you believe that geese grow on trees? Well, in the 19th century, if you'd said no, you would have been ridiculed. At the time, people believed in spontaneous generation, which is the idea that living things could originate from non-living matter.
Shazam!
For example, flies came from rotting meat and mice were made of dirty rags. Therefore, when people saw barnacles on driftwood that looked like geese, it was logical to think that these barnacles would grow into adult birds. Even when scientists cut the barnacles open and saw they didn't look like geese at all, it took the public decades to change their mind. But why?
We naively believe that people believe things because they think they're true. But that's just not true at all. When people form beliefs, they're looking at other people and seeing how these beliefs operate in a social context. If you have the same beliefs as somebody, they will like you a lot more. Then that makes you feel that that belief is more true.
We're evolved to survive by getting along with the people around us. Pursuing the truth probably evolved as a means of doing this, rather than something we inherently value for its own sake. Once society forms an ideology that is adequate enough to allow it to survive, poking around beyond this is unlikely to be encouraged and instead alienate you from the people you depend on socially, as Giordano Bruno found out when he was burned at the stake in 1600 by the Catholic Church for heretically claiming that stars were in fact distant suns that were orbited by their own planets.
The faculty you're using to reason evolved not to be sensitive to what's true, but just to what's going to make you more likely to survive.
But it was not all bad. In the past, before social media, our words and actions weren't immortalized online. If you lied or made a mistake, the consequences might be immediate and harsh, but over time, people would likely forgive and forget what happened.
If you're in a hunter-gatherer group and you say something, people might remember it, maybe they won't, but social media is really different. A tweet that I write hastily, that's something that is permanently recorded on the internet that I can't get rid of.
So is there a way to find truth in a society that pays lip service to it but genuinely seems to prioritize it less and less? The answer may come from a place we'd least expect it. This is military strategist John Boyd. He noticed that most people form opinions and approach decisions in a linear fashion, typically observing a problem, researching a solution, and then taking action. However, this method is inadequate for environments rife with misinformation such as the news and social media. If any part of our decision or opinion is based on bullshit, or if circumstances change, we're destined to fail even if our reasoning seems sound. We may still naively think of the internet as a town square where people come to share ideas, but in reality it's turning more into a battlefield. When people are working hard to direct our attention and control what we believe, we need new tools to assess the truth. Boyd proposed transforming truth-seeking from a linear process into a loop. This means continuously examining the consequences of our actions and using these to update our understanding of reality rather than just relying on more information. Rapidly cycling through this process doesn't entirely prevent us from being misled, but it at least gives us a chance to outmaneuver bullshit and hopefully avoid getting stuck. It also explains why platforms are so successful at getting us to consume more and more content. We gobble it up because we feel like we need to stay informed, but I'd argue it eventually just makes life more confusing and overwhelming.
A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information.
On May 16, 2022, the plus-size model Yumi Yu graced the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine. In response, Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson tweeted,
"Sorry, not beautiful, and no amount of totalitarian overreach will convince me otherwise."
The backlash was so intense that he temporarily quit Twitter, but I'm not going to condemn or support Peterson's tweet for one simple reason: insufficient information. When we communicate in person, we rely on three things: words, body language, and context. In fact, Albert Mehrabian's research shows that in face-to-face communication, body language and tone make up 93% of meaning, while words only account for 7%. Context is crucial too: where, why, and under what circumstances you say something. Your relationship with the person you're talking to also changes meaning. If you came back from a great holiday, you tell three very different versions of the story about it to your mum, your best friend, and your work colleagues. However, context has a downside. Since it's unique to each relationship, it doesn't scale. Social media sacrifices context with the benefit that messages can be spread quickly and widely understood. But communication without context creates a mental vacuum where we start assuming we know someone's intent, when in reality we can't be sure.
People over-interpret information. If some famous person just farts out a tweet, like a BBC journalist will write a whole piece about it, and they will assume that this is a hill that the person's willing to die on. But when people say things, it doesn't necessarily mean that they mean what they're saying.
After learning this rather depressing news, I needed to drown my sorrows. Surely I could find release from the siren song of bullshit in the bottom of a trustworthy bottle of wine. The global wine industry is worth $250 billion a year, and the opinions of highly paid wine critics like this man make or break which wines will become top sellers. But is wine tasting bullshit too?
There's just a flutter of like a nutty Edam cheese.
Frédéric Brochet of the University of Bordeaux asked 54 wine experts to test 2 glasses of wine, one red, one white. The panel described the white wine as fresh and citrusy and the red as jammy with crushed fruit. However, none of the professional critics were able to spot that both wines were exactly the same, the only difference being the red one had been coloured with a flavourless dye. Since then, researchers have debunked the wine tasting industry again and again, findings showing that even trained professionals are absolutely terrible at judging wine consistently. So why do we trust them? It's because how we judge the aptitude of someone we don't know personally has nothing to do with logic and everything to do with emotion and psychology. According to a recent study by Neil G. McLaren, the Babble Hypothesis suggests that those we judge as good leaders tend to just be the ones who speak the most. He did a study involving 256 students who were divided into groups and asked to choose leaders for a business simulation game. He found that those who spoke the most during the group discussions were more likely to be nominated as leaders by their peers, even after controlling for variables such as intelligence, charisma, and the quality of their contributions.
Blah, 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 blah.
The promise of the age of technology was this free exchange of ideas and the intellectual enlightenment age of rationality. But how close are we to this goal, really?
We're not living in an age of reason. We're living in an age of rationalizing and reductionism.
Improvements in technology create more choice in what we consume, sure. When it comes to consumer goods like refrigerators, competition among manufacturers goes up, so quality increases and prices come down, which is good for us. But if most people can agree on what makes a good refrigerator, why is it so much harder to agree on what makes a good idea? In his book, The Culture of Narcissism, Christopher Lasch predicted the technological explosion would paradoxically not increase truth and human connection as was widely predicted, but conversely would divert people to seek their identity just through the consumption of experiences and objects, which in turn would create more and more alienation anxiety and feed the cycle of consumerism. But there's one industry that's particularly to blame for this problem.
The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit.
The average person just doesn't know where to go to get reliable information anymore.
Why do you think it's impossible for politicians to answer a straight, simple question?
The media landscape has changed to be almost unrecognizable compared to what it was 50 years ago.
Even the really respectable papers are leaning more and more into rage-baity tactics.
In the past, there was a handful of powerful TV networks that controlled all the news. And although this concentration of power had its drawbacks, if wielded responsibly, it forced accountability on celebrities and leaders and politicians who only had a handful of platforms that they could use to promote their message. Anchors like the infamous Jeremy Paxson were so famous for grilling guests with these hard-hitting questions that challenged and forced accountability in a way almost never seen today on podcasts, where influencers can simply pick or choose which channels they wish to propagate their message.
Jeremy Paxman was the most feared BBC presenter.
When you go back to those old-fashioned values, how are they consonant with your party taking money from a pornographer? Horny housewives, mega boobs, posh wives, skinny and wriggly.
Evidence suggests the average person is consuming around 74 gigabytes or around 16 movies worth of new information every day, which is roughly equivalent to what an extremely educated person would process in an entire lifetime 500 years ago. And people who end up misleading others, whether through fault of their own or not, are able to stay ahead of this due to something called Brandolini's law, which states that
the amount of energy necessary to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than to produce it.
If you're like me, the only way to really cope with this barrage is by staying in echo chambers consisting pretty much only of people that already validate our existing beliefs and biases.
Many don't consider someone an expert unless they agree with them. They ignore every source they disagree with till they find one they agree with.
Triple stamp and double stamp. You can't triple stamp.
And then use this source to justify what they already believe.
Everyone has now decided to curate their information diet in a way that's bespoke to them, and we're losing the ability to converge on
a common picture of what's going on.
I am losing my mind.
But there's another reason why we do this. Going out deciding whose advice to trust is a type of problem solving called executive decision making. And it's particularly difficult because we're trying to decide who or what to consider and what to discard before we even get to the stage of processing what they're saying. Humans have evolved to judge each other based on superficial characteristics, like assuming if someone is attractive, they must be more intelligent. Back in the low information environment like the savannah where our ancestors evolved, information was scarce, so we didn't always have the luxury of being so shallow. Life wasn't just about who had the best hairline or the whitest teeth, it was about who could find water or spot a lion lurking in the bushes. Today we're drowning in information, and because of this we're often forced to fall back on these old prejudices and stereotypes to decide whom to listen to and whom to ignore, because we simply don't have enough time to consider everyone's perspective on its own merit. So a person's charisma, their good looks or otherwise, presentation, production value, etc., all end up being necessary to even get someone to pay attention to what we have to say.
Not everything needs to sound so goddamn clever or charming or likable all the time.
And it's not only influencers who are affected. The news helps people learn about important things. However, social media gamifies the news. People can earn attention, status, and belonging by sharing their takes on popular international stories, even when they distract from the real issues of daily life, regardless of if they have anything useful to say.
People seem to have this need to react to everything.
Well, you can't know very much about everything, and so your opinions are likely to be based upon bullshit.
The news doesn't really help me in my day-to-day life. It doesn't make me any wiser. It's just entertainment that is presented in such a way that you don't feel guilty for consuming it because you think you're learning.
What's true and useful, the vast majority of it is old, and yet we're obsessed with the news. That goes to show that we're more interested in being part of the conversation than we are at finding useful truths.
All this combined means that in an attention economy like the one we live in, it's often more effective to invest energy into the presentation and packaging of a message than it is to improve the quality of the message itself. After all, what does it matter what you say if nobody's going to see it? Which is a good time to ask you to subscribe if you're enjoying my content. But one thing's for sure, trying to make sense of this complex world alone is incredibly dangerous and leaves us vulnerable to being misled. Richard Rorty argued that the search for truth is collaborative. In order to move forwards, we need to constantly be checking our conclusions with other people to make sure we aren't going off course. It is particularly important to do this with people who disagree with our conclusions, as they may end up having valuable insights that we've missed.
The civilization cannot thrive if differing points of view cannot be heard.
But this leads to the rather superficial conclusion, often bandied about in alternative media, that we need to be willing to have more difficult conversations.
What you need to do is have a full, frank and honest conversation.
This approach only works if we're engaging with people who share the same fundamental vision for society. If I think we should build a car and you think we should build a house, it's pretty pointless to argue about whether to use bricks or metal. In my opinion, the breakdown in society isn't due to a lack of difficult conversations. Instead, it's caused by a splintering of values due to people living in their own bespoke versions of reality. So what would be a good common goal or value to engage in these dialogues with? And, I got an answer for this from a spiritual teacher called A.H. Almas, who said, "Joy is the radiance of the heart when the truth is appreciated." And I found it fascinating he said appreciated, not reached or even strived towards. American philosopher Richard Rorty argued that the truth is not this fixed destination that we're ever likely to actually reach, but more like a goal that we collaborate towards through dialogue and exploration.
And it's not that there's something out there that we have to get to by a chain of reasoning. It's a responsive, relational thing. And you know when you're onto a path that is somehow succeeding in approaching the truth.
And look, I'm not saying that whether someone's right or wrong isn't important. It's just that as a base value, sometimes this sincerity matters as much as the statements themselves. So no, I don't think that social media and technology proportionally increase the amount of bullshit in the world. It's just that the tools we subconsciously use to discern good intent from bad, truth from bullshit have largely gone away and no one has really noticed. So what are these tools? Well, shared context and values are two prerequisites we discussed already. But the other two are costly signals, which we'll get into in a minute, and humor.
Is there anything that we should do about bullshit?
One solution is to make fun of it.
Some anthropologists believe that humor evolved as a way to test if groups of people would be able to cooperate with each other.
If you're going to tell the truth, you better be funny or they'll fucking kill you.
And this is because laughing together at jokes demonstrate that the teller and the audience share some kind of common understanding of the world. Take this example.
When I was in America, I really got into the culture. I went into a shop and the guy said, "Have a nice day," and I didn't, so I sued him.
In order for this joke to be funny, the audience needs to share the same context as the speaker, in this case, a stereotype about American language and culture. If you've ever had to explain a joke or have one explained to you, you'll know that it can become incredibly awkward. And this is because the purpose of a joke is not to share information, but to bond over these shared assumptions of reality. By being able to engage with each other in a spirit of good humor, it demonstrates really that preserving this context that we have with each other is like more important than winning or losing the individual arguments being made. And I think this is also counterintuitively why humor is such a powerful persuasion technique. In my opinion, you can kind of gauge the cohesion or division in a society by what is considered socially acceptable humor.
You cannot joke about that.
But what about costly signals? Well, when it comes to trusting or mistrusting somebody, it's useful to look at what we mutually sacrificed for each other first. Let's take, for example, the function of an engagement ring. An engagement ring just isn't useful in a practical way. In fact, you could say it's just the opposite. It turns a lot of money into something that only has meaning for two people and only for a short period of time. But that's exactly its point. It's not about what the ring can do, it's about the sacrifice it represents. In my opinion, what makes strong relationships is not dialogue, but a series of these costly signals. When you hang out with a friend, the things you say and do are fun, but what builds trust is showing up and sacrificing something valuable, your time and energy, to keep the relationship going. As technology gets better, people rely on each other less, so we also lose the chance to show we care through these kinds of actions. It's very telling that many of the people we now turn to for advice on social media have really sacrificed nothing for us directly. Why would we trust an influencer's opinion on relationships, health, or business when we're complete strangers and really have no stake in each other's lives? It's very likely, I think, because people have a deep need for leadership and guidance, and in secular societies lacking traditional religious structures or healthy social institutions, this need now manifests as online clan loyalties to influencers and their ideologies.
A 2016 study found that Twitter users trusted their favorite online influencers nearly as much as their close personal friends.
What I've learned from making this video is summed up in a quote by Jonathan Haidt. Anyone who values truth should stop worshipping reason. Human rationality is more akin to a politician searching for votes than a scientist seeking truth. Appreciation of truth is a relatively recent societal value. It's incredibly fragile and requires constant vigilance to maintain. However, rationality isn't useless. According to Hugo Mercier, reasoning evolved not to find truth, but to help us argue, persuade, and manipulate others. And while this may seem counterproductive at an individual level, collectively we're like neurons in a brain. This arguing, persuasion, and even manipulation allows truth to emerge as a kind of network effect. But this only works as long as the group values truth above all else, or what Haidt calls has shared intentionality. If you put people together in the right way, some individuals can use their reasoning powers to disconfirm the claims of others, provided all individuals feel some common bond or shared fate. It allows them to interact civilly, and you can form a group that creates good reasoning. Therefore, I think it's crucial that communities organize around shared goals and values like solving local problems, rather than what we tend to do online, which is form communities around shared political views and interests. This way, differences of opinion can create vigor that strengthen thought instead of dividing us into separate, warring ideologies. If you found value in this video, there are a few simple ways you can help keep this channel growing. If you're able, please consider buying me a coffee using the links in the description. It's your support that allows me to make more content like this. Please take a second to hit the like button to get this video out to more people and subscribe so you won't miss out on any future content. I also read and reply to all your comments. If you're looking for more personalized help, I also offer limited one-to-one coaching sessions to help improve your mental health, especially if you suffer from internet addiction. All links are in the description below. Thanks so much for your time.